Guys, it's Jason Matty again. I am in just outside of Puerto Rico, and this is how kind of the locals here are getting baths and showering and things like that. You guys check this out. Yeah, so this is how they're doing it. Pretty much filling up water and filling up the place of the pool. Walk down here. Take a picture. Yeah, so that's how the locals are doing it here, taking showers. And watch this cells off. They're not drinking this, by the way. So everything's good. Alright, so just want to show you guys this. Pretty amazing. Mainly what we're doing and what the problem issues that we're running into is the supply lines, coordinators, things like that. They're not talking to each other. So we're trying to provide the link from certain airports where supplies are to certain cities that need them desperately, and get them speaking to each other. So that's what we kind of spent yesterday doing. And we're currently getting escorted by the local police here to deliver supplies. We've loaded 5 of our own personal vehicles up with food and water, and we're going to take it directly to the mountains. Chris, you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the situation is this: we have people that have been stuck in the mountains, and nobody has gotten food or water to them for 19 days. Well, today is day 19. We have several of our own personal vehicles escorted by the police. We have them all loaded out with food and water. The situation as we know it is the roads might be clear, but none of the locals want to go up there due to the fact that there is a high potential of landslides up there. If there's been more landslides because of the last 2 days, then we're going to have to hand carry this up the side of the mountain. But that's all we know for right now, and we will be showing you what's going on ground. Anything else?
This is like a freaking nuke went off in this place, man.
I've seen some of these houses that are hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
The question is what happened during the storm versus what's happened in the past few days of consistent raining. And you can already tell it's about to rain again here in just a couple of hours. So it's not this bridge. We're good here.
It's kind of racing against the clock here, against the rain.
Well, yeah, when the monsoon comes in, that could really end things.
That's going to get a whole new level real fast.
Yeah.
Water! One water! In the mountains, helping these families out that's been cut off.
How you doing, Dave?
You good?
Water.
One water. You good? Hola. Okay? Take care. If I missed anything. Oh, life straws. Ask anybody if there's any way to get us life straws instead of bottled water. If you want to send that, life straws would be amazing to these people because you can reuse it over and over and over again. And if we can get life straws up into the mountains for these people, then that would be an excellent resource. That way they can use it over and over, and they can have clean and fresh water, constantly. So they're not waiting on us to go up and deliver a case for them. They're constantly getting it. Like I said, thank you for your support.
This is Pablo Acevedo in the front, and he's really the reason I now do some research and study in bamboo. Pablo was my master's degree student, but in reality he was my teacher in all of this, because I had a few years ago a project for the National Science Foundation in the broad category of doing various so-called appropriate technologies, and I happened to run into a professor one day that knew him, and he said, "You have to meet Pablo." He said, "He's an expert in bamboo." And I said, "Really?" It sounded interesting to me. So I want to just acknowledge him for my own interest and my own growing knowledge of what I think I know and maybe all the things I don't yet know. But he is very inspirational for me in many reasons. He's a true epitome of what I think is, you know, the engaged student who doesn't just do the technical things but sees the social impact and the importance of that. He's a very humble person, and he has also spent the last several weeks of his life working both officially and unofficially, helping the recovery mission by distributing water filters, managing a waste disposal center, and so forth. So, okay, next slide. I'm going to go in some broad strokes here to cover a few things that we might have, and there's a few clicks, this is the thing. So there's a couple maps of Puerto Rico here, and just a real quick takeaway of this is that Puerto Rico is a small island with many microclimates. So you can see cactuses on the beach, and you can see rainforests. And so that's just my quick thing. I'll keep speeding through this because I don't want to do everything that's in detail. But there are different kinds of rain and soil types in the island, and it is amazing to me as a relative newcomer. I moved to Puerto Rico in 2009. I'm amazed at the diversity of the microclimates and other conditions that were not customary when I lived in Wisconsin and New York and Pennsylvania. So, yeah, just a bit about the history of some of the bamboo in Puerto Rico. Evidently, the Spanish brought the bamboo to Puerto Rico in the 18th or 19th century, and it's believed largely for doing things like soil stabilization. The Bambusa vulgaris species is the dominant one that you see commonly on the roadsides. The other varieties that you see are more in private or public collections. So what's known as the TARS, the Tropical Agricultural Research Station, maintains approximately 20 species, but some private collections, some of you know the name of Sadu, have about 100, and others have various other numbers. It is very common again on riverbanks and along roadsides, and now of course we've been dealing with that literally to clear it out of the roadways. But even before the hurricane, it wasn't what you might say appropriately managed, and so we're trying to work on that aspect. Bamboo on his farm, this is the section where the guadua is planted, and I'll say this is very typical of what you see all over Puerto Rico right now. And one thing that surprised me, among other things by the way, is that so many of the bamboos just cracked, and it was also not near the base but at the middle. And last weekend I spent some time thinking about that, and I did some very rough approximate calculations, and I was able to show that, you know, with common wind speeds, which were easily 100 miles per hour in this region, maybe up to 130, it's certainly very plausible that the bamboo will crack, because once you hit 100 miles per hour wind, you're getting something like 20 pounds per square foot of wind pressure. And if you go through the calculations about even what would an isolated column be experiencing over a length of maybe 15 meters of height, this is very plausible. And the reason that it doesn't maybe crack at the base, where you might expect to be the biggest, you know, reaction point, because at some point the base supports everything, but because the bamboo is tapered, the natural evolution of bamboo has allowed it to have a relatively constant reaction to stress throughout its comb. And so it turns out that maybe the middle points are somewhat slightly weaker than the base points, given the overall complex way that bamboo has evolved in this way. But anyway, there's dozens of pictures like this. This is also near his farm. This is right on the river bank, where I think that it's interesting that here I would have expected to see some flooding, but the bamboo didn't collapse too much by my visual inspection in this photograph. It suffered wind damage, but it didn't actually come uprooted from the ground. But I have a lot of other pictures I can show you about that. So anyway, there's a lot of things that we can discuss later about this, but to anticipate some discussions later in the conference, we could discuss how maybe any of you would want to come back to Puerto Rico and help us sort some of these things out.
This is Bruce Bagnoli here at West County Oasis Bamboo Nursery in Santa Rosa area. And I'm here with Chris.
Thank you, Bruce. Very great to be here. My name is Christopher Papadopoulous, and I'm a professor of engineering at the University of Puerto Rico Mayagüez campus.
Well, Chris, you were there during the Hurricane Maria. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you?
Well, personally speaking, it all ended up okay for me, but going into the hurricane, I did a number of preparations at my house. I own an antique house in the downtown area of Mayaguez, which is built with a concrete roof, and I felt it was basically secure, but I did a lot of preparations in the week upcoming. In fact, beginning with Irma earlier in September, I did some preparations in the house, like sealing the roof and so on. And so I do have a back part of the house with some roof panels, which I put some sandbags on to help weigh it down, and I also built some, we call them tormentera, some window boards to protect the window. But I must admit, when I saw the forecast in the days upcoming, initially for 95, then 115, up to 130 mile an hour winds for periods of several hours, I started asking myself, what am I doing in my house? But it turned out that we were okay, my girlfriend and I, and after the storm, because we were in the downtown area where there's a lot of government buildings and hospitals, we're in a priority area, so I was very fortunate to be one of the 1% maybe that had their water and electricity after just 1 week, so after about 3 days in fact. So a bit longer for internet, but otherwise I personally fared quite well. But I will say that my situation is not meant to be a barometer. In fact, it's an anomaly. So even in the Mayaguez area, which is on the west coast, we are somewhat less affected overall than the rest of the island, because as the storm passes over the island, over the mountains, it attenuates a little bit. But even in our area, there were some communities that suffered deep flooding, some entire destruction of houses. In the mountainous areas not too far from Mayaguez, there were houses that fell off hills on mudslides. And of course, most of those areas are still disconnected from electricity right now, because it's going to be a slow process to rebuild that network in that kind of terrain.
Yeah, the pictures I've seen from that area, it looks like in the mountains in particular, most of the power lines are down, it looks like.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I admit I have not been too many places into the heart of Puerto Rico, but I have traveled in some of the mountain communities within an hour's drive of Mayaguez in the last couple of weeks. And so I wouldn't say that all the power cables are down uniformly, but there are certainly sections where they came down quite a bit. And for whatever reason, if it's all or half or a fraction, you certainly have people without their power right now, because the whole network is not functioning, except in some small regions right now.
So in your town, how is the situation with food and water and so forth afterwards?
So again, in the immediate area, there were not too many problems that I experienced personally, but again, in areas even within a few minutes of Mayaguez, even my colleagues and students where they live would have been without their power and water services. So we invited our friends into our house for using water and electricity after those first few days. And then the municipality did set up some water oasis in the central plaza, as well as a charging station. So we had that in a limited basis, but to be honest, when people couldn't drive in that area, that didn't necessarily reach them. So there were some other strategies being used to reach people outlying of even the center of the Mayaguez city.
And how about food and supplies?
I think that there's definitely been a reduction in several of those things. Like, for example, with the fresh fruits and vegetables, there definitely was a visible reduction both in the public market and grocery stores of those things. And I did see about 2 or 3 weeks ago a couple grocery stores with entire freezer sections empty and a lot of frozen foods on clearance sale. In Mayaguez, again, the food stocks are still stable. However, I haven't personally seen what I would call a real food emergency. I don't want to speak for other people that maybe have a worse situation than I have, but I can tell you, even in the mountains where I visited the last few weeks, I didn't see what I would call an absolute desperation, but I did see, for example, people saving cold food in little coolers with ice packs, and they would have to go daily and find ice or something like that. So it's definitely a severe situation, but maybe not an entire disaster of absolute starvation.
So how did the university fare?
The university overall, I think, is functioning well. Immediately after the hurricane, I did take a walk through the campus and took a number of photographs, which maybe I could share with you later.
Great.
And the majority of the damage was consisting of fallen trees and that kind of debris. I wouldn't say there was any major structural damage to buildings, but there were some cases where ground floors of some buildings were flooded, and there was also a problem with mold accumulating in some of the rooms across the campus. So there were a lot of things to do to, like, take out rug tiles and air them out, take out soft fabric chairs, air them out, bleach them a little bit, and so forth. So I don't want to say there was nothing, but overall we certainly survived with, I think, reasonable effects, and I'm very proud and happy to say that we opened up the campus just this past Monday on October 30th for the resumption of our classes.
Great.
So
that's great. That's really good news. And how about your, there's some amazing collections of bamboo in Puerto Rico. I think Frank McClure years ago helped establish some. And do you know how, is there a collection in your area, or do you know how any of these fared?
Well, I can't speak very technically on a species by species basis, but what I will tell you is this, in terms of the collections, in Mayagüez, right next to our campus, there's a branch of the USDA Agricultural Research Service. It's called the Tropical Agricultural Research Station, and they feature a bamboo garden of about 20 different species, and then there's a surrounding forest area with several of the same in larger quantities. I was able to walk into the garden of the tars within about a week after the hurricane, and I saw a combination of light damage to severe. And for my investigation there, and also just driving around Puerto Rico, and let me just add this point, the dominant species in Puerto Rico is called vulgaris, okay? And so there's a lot of roadways where there's just roadways lined with bamboo under normal conditions, and now those bamboo often fell into the roadway. But basically there were three types of damage that were observed. One is called a fanning pattern, where maybe a clump of bamboo didn't collapse or even break, but it sort of fanned out. Another mode of failure we saw was when bamboo columns would entirely tip over from the root. And then the third mode we saw was many of the bamboos cracked and fell over at about their mid-height. And from the engineering perspective, we were thinking about this, and as many of you might know, the bamboo column is tapered as it goes from bottom to top. So although the maximum total reaction forces are maximum at the base, because bamboo has naturally evolved as a so-called smart fiber reinforced material, it has just about the right amount of fibrous section it needs to support the conditions in a relatively constant fashion as it goes up. So you can't explain a mid-height failure on the basis of the weakest point really could be at the mid-height rather than at the base. But those are the three things we saw. But there's a lot of bamboo on the ground right now that I hope we can figure out what we can do with it productively. But those are things that have never been planned before in a systematic way. And so we'll probably hope to do maybe just a few experiments here and there and see what we can maybe try to attempt in small scale. But the bamboo in general did suffer many damages, but the good news is also that the bamboo grows quickly. So within weeks you see new shoots coming off of columns, both fallen and cracked. And I have a good friend who has a bamboo farm, and he wants to take advantage of this by cutting, let's say, 4-foot sections of fallen columns and put them in the ground horizontally to have the new shoots grow up. And so we think that there is potential to regrow. The real issue is how will it be organized. So if you had a farm initially, it is probably advisable to try and clear it out. But one thing your viewers might want to know is that among other things, there has been and still is now somewhat of a shortage of power tools, because you can't just go and find the same supply that we had before the hurricane. So we are still in need of people sending chainsaws and supplies like that to help people clear things out.
The area. So. Yeah. Well, the type of bamboo that grows, that you're talking about, mostly grows in tropical areas, and it's a clumping bamboo. And in particular, vulgaris, Bambusa vulgaris, is fairly weak as far as the structural strength goes among the bamboos. It does have some good strength.
Well, let me say that there's always this combination of material versus structural effects, and the study that we did with Pablo Acevedo, who was my master's degree student a couple years ago, but in reality Pablo was my mentor in bamboo, because he did a lot of self-study before I knew anything about bamboo. When we began working together, we did do a study of several tropical bamboo species cultivated in the Mayagüez area for their mechanical properties. And what we found is that in general, at the material level, in terms of, let's say, modulus of elasticity or ultimate failure stresses, some of the lesser known bamboos for construction, such as vulgaris, perform even higher than things like the guadua. But where the guadua comes in is it has generally the larger total diameter and section modules. Okay, so the point is that on the basis of the sheer capacity, the vulgaris might not be the strongest one in the absolute sense because it has a smaller diameter, but there are strategies to use that species also for construction by bundling it, or using other strategies of design. In other words, when you think about design, the question can always be, within an overall objective, how can you achieve something? And although maybe one option using guadua is a very standardized method and a very valid method, it doesn't mean that that's the only style of design. Maybe there's an entire new style of design that could be used with vulgaris that we haven't developed yet. Okay?
Well, when it's a great resource like that and it grows, it's so easy to propagate. And it's been propagated all over the island. It's a huge resource. So learning about that is a very useful thing for the culture.
Yes.
And so in terms of the recovery process overall, how do you feel that's progressing?
Well, it's definitely progressing slowly, and I certainly feel there are a number of factors at work. I think some of it is there is bureaucracy, there is corruption. Your viewers are probably aware of the emerging scandal of the Whitefish Energy Company from Montana that just got exposed a couple weeks ago. Now their contract has been canceled, and although our governor did call for the cancellation of that contract, as far as I know, he did not call for an investigation of how that contract was developed, nor for the firing of the leader of the electrical authority who basically approved the contract. So there are some questions behind that. And my experience even last year in Haiti with Hurricane Matthew, when we did a relief effort from Puerto Rico, I know from speaking with my friends in Haiti personally who went to the dock in the city of Lake Cay, there was some corruption where the municipal government and other officials appeared to be commandeering more than their share of the supplies that were sent. So I won't deny that might be happening in Puerto Rico, but on the other hand, I feel that we have to all get to work and do our part. So I'm a believer in a both and, bottom-up and top-down approach. I think FEMA is on the ground. They are helping people fill in their applications for disaster assistance. They are appearing at community events to help manage the distribution of supplies. That doesn't mean that they're doing enough. I also read in ProPublica, I think it was about a week or so ago, apparently there was a FEMA document that was written in 2005. This is just about 5 years, maybe 7 years after Hurricane George happened. But the FEMA had produced a document specifically for Puerto Rico for a response to a major hurricane, and there's a similar document for Hawaii. And when some of the journalists from ProPublica asked for this document, they were initially told they could have it, and then they told it had to go through Freedom of Information. So there's certainly some, at least, evidence to suggest, is there something that FEMA is not doing that it should be doing, and that might be coming from the very top of the administration about what is not being provided. But let me also make this very important point. While I don't feel it's fair to say FEMA is doing nothing, I feel it's very appropriate to say we don't need to wait for FEMA all the time to be doing their work. And so I'm a part of a number of community and groups on our campus and in Mayagüez. One is called the Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, which means the Brigades of the West in Solidarity. And we organized the collection of suministro, aid, supplies, food, water, medicines, clothing, and so on. And we have a network of volunteers who distribute these things in their personal vehicles up into the mountainous and coastal regions near Mayagüez where people were most affected. And we have also been very blessed to have a number of independent people from outside raise money to send water filters. There's one in particular by the name of Sawyer. The Sawyer filter is a cartridge about 3 or 4 inches long, and each cartridge can filter approximately 100,000 gallons of water. Wow. And they're quite easy to distribute and connect to standard 5-gallon buckets or even larger 55-gallon buckets or larger. So I would say that if any of your viewers are interested in helping Puerto Rico in this way for direct aid, look up Sawyer Filter Puerto Rico maybe, or if I can give a plug for my friend who's doing the work in our area, his name is Keith Lowry, Lowry. He's from Texas. He has a GoFundMe page, so if you search on Keith Lowry Filters Puerto Rico, I'm sure you'll find his GoFundMe page. And he's already been able to bring in a couple thousand filters to our immediate region. And I've personally been working with some other of his colleagues, including Pablo, who I mentioned earlier with the bamboo. Pablo is also spending his time now working to help distribute these filters. And I now hope that now that our university is open to engage our students in these activities, including for themselves. Some of my students who have returned are still without in their family's house water and electricity, and they're still coming back to campus. So I'm going to make it a part of my class now to give them points in their project to actually learn how to assemble these filters and share them and teach people, and that will be part of their service learning and so forth. So the other thing that we've been doing, which I'll confess is not absolutely as necessary as I thought, but we have built some small so-called rocket stoves, wood-burning stoves. There is a lot of course, wood debris on the ground, and you can make these out of used food cans or out of bricks or out of concrete blocks, whatever you have available. And initially I was actually having trouble finding people who needed this, because despite the lack of water and electricity, most people I met, even in some mountain areas, had tanks of propane to cook with. But last week when I went to a city called Las Marias to a community event, I actually did find several families who had nothing, and when they saw these stoves that we were demonstrating, they actually wanted some. So we actually gave away a few of them. We helped them fabricate them, and I brought my metal shears to cut them out and stuff. And some of their children were making these things just impromptu. So it was a very nice event from a point of view of not just usefulness, but there was some engagement, there was some interest, and I saw even these kids light up and say, wow, this is really cool, you know. And so so we've been doing those kind of things, and I guess I have other colleagues in electrical engineering developing plans to build off-grid boxes to collect rainwater, but also to bring solar charging stations to mountain communities. So I think now is the time to at least rethink not just disaster relief, but resilience. I'd like to see a master logistic where every municipality can engage schools and community centers to be automatically centers where there might be sand filters or other filtration capacity, satellite phones, wood burning capacity, solar charging stations, a variety of things, and have a plan about it. Because ultimately what I see is the problem is that if I go myself with the best of intentions and we do good work, I have no way of reporting what we did to an authority to say, hey, we've been here, and then how do they know not to repeat the effort, okay? So the point is, I don't see there's anything wrong with what we're doing, but at the same point, there could be a better organization if there were a master planning logistic created. And so in the meantime, we are doing things in some ad hoc basis with our community groups, but I will say the ad hoc basis is very important right now, so don't misunderstand my message. I'm just saying we could improve the process, I think, in the future with more planning.
This is the time for lessons learned, not some other time where we've forgotten the pain. We have to do it when it's fresh in our minds. And I understand that they've used balloons to reintroduce certain limited service. Is that
I heard about that, but I had no direct involvement in that, nor did I receive service from that, and I've even heard some questions about did it really work, so I honestly can't comment definitively about that, but I did hear about that. And
I'm always asking people on the ground, because we only hear the marketing stuff here, and so we never quite know. So that's great. So other things you think of that we might want to cover?
Well, just a few basic things. Just because it's come up, I have the impression that your reviewers are very educated, so forgive me if I'm saying something you know already, but at least for your friends and your neighbors and your political leaders and so on, it's so important to emphasize that Puerto Ricans are United States citizens that are fully deserving of the full haste and effort of the United States Federal Emergency Services.